over there that are in desperate need of these items, and we can make a profound difference right now in what's going on over there.
Pastor Tom of the People's City Mission says they teamed up with Convoy of Hope after talking to aid workers. The U.S. is also concerned about North Korea's continued missile tests.
The Pentagon concerned about North Korea's long-range missile tests and wants to negotiate an end to them.
We will be willing to sit down with North Korea without preconditions to talk in good faith to find a diplomatic path forward here.
Pentagon spokesman John Kirby saying so far North Korea has shown no interest in talking peace. Andy Field, ABC News, Washington.
The House voted to hold former Trump administration officials Peter Navarro and Dan Scavino in contempt of Congress. Both men refused to comply with subpoenas from the House January 6th committee. The governor of Texas ordering state troopers to stop and inspect commercial vehicles crossing the U.S. border into his state. As for those trying to cross without documents,
Texas is providing charter buses to send these illegal immigrants who have been dropped off by the Biden administration to Washington, D.C.
Governor Greg Abbott is making the change as Title 42, which limited migration due to COVID-19, is about to be lifted. You're listening to ABC News.
You're the one who protects the flock, and that requires an eye for detail. Because when safety and well-being are on the line, it's the details that can save lives. Even when no one else is watching, you see everything. Grainger gets you, and we're here for you, and all the ones who get it done with a wide range of safety products and solutions, plus board-certified safety consultants here to answer your questions. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Yeah, I'm so stressed. Our business is growing. We've got people all over now.
Ooma.
What is that? Meditation?
I'm recommending Ooma and their all-in-one phone, video, and collaboration solution.
Ooma?
Yep. Switching to Ooma is a cinch. Just $24.95 per month per user, plus taxes and fees.
Ooma.
Now you're feeling it. Visit Ooma.com. That's OOMA.com to learn more. Ooma. Smart communications for the smarter business.
A wind energy company has been sentenced to probation in order to pay more than $8 million in fines after killing at least 150 eagles at farms across the U.S. NextEra Energy subsidiary ESI Energy pleaded guilty to 3 counts of violating the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Calls for parole reform in California following Sunday's deadly Sacramento shooting.
One of the suspects arrested in relation to Sunday's shooting got out of prison for kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, and other crimes only weeks ago. Sacramento Mayor Darrell Steinberg says it's time to invest more in inmates getting out to offer them help so they don't reoffend.
Our systems need to do more to ensure that people who have been part of the criminal justice system do not remain part of the criminal justice system for their long lives.
He's calling for investments in mental health counseling and housing when an inmate leaves prison with little to nothing. Alex Stone, ABC News.
Maryland's House has approved a $400 million plan to develop the area around FedEx Field in an attempt to get the Washington Commanders to stay put. It now goes to the state Senate. Health officials in Europe are investigating a salmonella outbreak in 134 children, which appears to be linked to chocolate Easter eggs, which usually have a toy inside. Italian confectionery group Ferrero has recalled several batches of Kinder Surprise chocolate eggs from shelves in Britain and Spain. This is ABC News.
This is Fogelman, ready to hustle but and bustle.
Membership numbers at Sly's Gym have been racking up.
22 people have signed up for 6 a.m. buns of steel.
Now he needs more certified trainers to do all the heavy lifting.
I'm going to have to bulk up my staff.
Indeed can help him hire great people fast.
I need Indeed.
Indeed you do. Our hiring platform instantly connects you with quality candidates whose resumes on Indeed match your job description. Visit Indeed.com/credit and get $75 towards your first sponsored job. Terms and conditions apply.
Daria Albinger, ABC News.
From the KMET Weather Center for Beaumont, Banning, and the Pass area, sunny this afternoon, clear skies tonight, low at 63. Sunny tomorrow, some areas of blowing dust, wind gusts around 40 miles an hour with a high at 90. For the Inland Empire, a wind advisory and heat advisory in effect. Clear skies tonight with a low at 62, sunny and 95 tomorrow. And for Palm Springs, clear skies tonight and 70. I'm Todd Edwards on Smart Talk 1490 KMET.
The following is a paid program. Views and claims expressed are those of the program producer and are not endorsed by this station. Opinions expressed are not necessarily those of radio station KMET, its management, employees, or affiliates.
Time now for West Coast Business Review with Daryl McCants. The show focuses on successful businesses from California's southern border to Canada and great neighboring states from Arizona to Nevada and more. And now, here's Daryl McCants.
Thank you for joining the West Coast Business Review with myself, Daryl McCants, and my special guest host, the world-famous Bill Morris, Wall Street executive, loved professor at the University of California, Irvine, and world record holder for sit-ups at 20,100. He always gets mad at me when I bring that up, but the proceeds went to Make-A-Wish Foundation, and every time I say 20,100, I get nervous because I can do probably two. Anyway, we are broadcasting from the center of Southern California on ABC News Radio, 1490 AM, 98.1 FM, and KMET TV. We are news, talk, and sports, the home of Dave Ramsey, Ken Coleman, three-time Emmy Award winner Bill McLeod, and more. And we love broadcasting live, free at no charge. These Super Bowl champions, LA Rams, we have the Lakers, we have the Clippers and Angels, and more. And we are broadcasting from the desert to the mountains to the sea, right here on KMET. We are live and in between two empires. And in between 5 international airports, Ontario International Airport, Los Angeles International Airport, and John Wayne International Airport to our west, Palm Springs International to our east, and San Diego International to our south. Get us crystal clear live worldwide by going to the Google Play or the Apple App Store and downloading the free KMET smartphone app today. We focus each week on discussions, special series, and interviews of successful West Coast businesses in all sectors of our economy. Technology, innovation, new ideas, best practices are bringing the West Coast together stronger than ever. Before we begin today, a special thank you to our team, Mitch, Bill, Jesse at the station, and our amazing advisory group that include Jay Kaplan, catch his show every Friday at 3 p.m., the Walker Law Group, and James Carvin. Today's show, this is going to be fun, Bill. We are focusing on intellectual property. Now, just that title, I feel like my IQ just went up 3 points, okay? And, yeah. And so now I'm going to round out at 100. I went from 97 to 100 with that extra 3 points there. But on a serious note, our guest, Rand Brewer, CEO, Licensing Consulting Group. And, Rand, if you'll indulge me, I'm going to go ahead and give a little bit. I love a piece that's written about you where it talks about your passion for helping others, inventors, startups, and businesses of all sizes using licensing to turn their intellectual property into income-producing products, services, and technologies. Your decades of experience run the gamut from medical devices to food technology to consumer products. You've been involved in licensing some of the biggest Hollywood entertainment blockbusters, including the Batman movies, 1 and 2, and a number of kids' action TV shows, the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and more. So without any further delay, with Bill Morris and I, go ahead, Bill. What were you going to say?
I also want to say before we get started, a big shout out to Rand and a big thank you just from the bottom of my heart. Rand and I have been friends for a number of years, and as I have been a professor at UCI at the School of Business, I teach strategy and I teach entrepreneurship, and Rand was always willing to come in and talk to my kids, which I just can't even thank him enough, because my kids, I call them my kids, my students would never get the exposure of understanding what licensing is all about because they don't offer a course in that. And obviously from a strategy standpoint, if you're building a business or whatever the situation might be, you really have to be exposed to understand how it works, what goes on, and what licensing is all about. Rand's going to go through that today, but he has been so generous with his time, and I love you, man. Thank you so much for the years that you've given me, coming into my classes. I can't thank you enough. You're the best. But maybe what we should start with, Daryl, is let Rand kind of start with his background. How he
absolutely,
and how he got involved with this, because that's a really fascinating story. Because I remember, I remember this story. So we'll let Rand, take the ball and go.
Yep.
Okay. Well, Bill, as always, great to see you. Thank you, and Daryl, so much appreciated. I always enjoyed coming out and sharing stories and talking about something that I think a lot of people know of but don't really know about, and that is intellectual property and licensing. And so, where I'll start, which is a question I often get asked, is how did I get into this business? And the answer is by accident. It was one of those periods of time, this was back in the 80s, when I had joined the movie studio, and I'd started at Warner Brothers. And it was at a time when movie studios did not have any kind of significant revenue from what's called licensed merchandise. And it just happened to be that they had a movie coming out and they weren't sure if it was going to be successful. It was based on a comic book character that hadn't been seen since the early 60s. And so the industry didn't really even exist. In fact, there weren't any people out there that really had experience. So it was one of these things of knowing somebody who knew somebody who called you up one day and said, hey, how'd you like to come work at the movie studios? So, that's what I did. And for that first movie, it was really just a question of who can you go out and find to make some products around this movie, because we're not sure what's going to happen with it. So in those days, there wasn't any formal structure for licensing at the studio. So I kind of got thrown into the fire and learned licensing on the go. Lots of wild stories at the movie studios, as there always is. And from there, once the movie kind of caught fire and then suddenly everybody was into it, a lot of studios woke up and saw suddenly, wow, we can make some money with this licensing. And so I spent a number of years there, and then I moved over and was running the licensing division at the time, working on licensing out the next big kids property, which was the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, a big TV show that also spun off some movies. And here again, a lot of crazy licensing deals, a lot of toys and T-shirts and hats and fast food promotions and all the stuff that you see around a lot of these big entertainment properties. But that really set the cycle for a lot of the entertainment. In fact, most of the entertainment industry today, if you fast forward, you'll find that merchandise licensing is a big part of their revenue pie now, because you have TV shows and movies that are partnering up with large toy companies and video games and things like that and creating enormous amounts of money. And then they partner with retails and everybody combines to help promote the movie or TV show. So that's really how I got my start. And I spent about a decade on that side of the business, and then left that side of the business, did some consulting work. And as I did more of that, thought, why not set up more of a full-time consulting business, get further into it, and then along the way made a transition away from doing so much consumer products in entertainment, where it got very competitive. And then of course with retail, it kind of shrank, and got more into working with patents and technologies and trade secrets and things like that. And what was interesting is, coming out of the licensing business, being in entertainment and working in licensing, when I left and set up my consulting business, I assumed that everybody understood intellectual property and licensing. And so as I went out to talk to people, and I would start talking to companies or individuals or inventors, it suddenly dawned on me very quickly, nobody really understood licensing and intellectual property. I mean, everybody understands there's patents, trademarks, copyrights, not as much about trade secrets, but certainly the idea of licensing and what it is, very little knowledge about it. And in fact, what I discovered is most people think of licensing as a legal thing, a legal process. And legal is part of it. There's a legal document. What I like to do in my presentations, and Bill has heard me talk about this, is one of the first points that I bring up, especially when it comes to licensing, is you have to understand there's two different things. One is a license. A license is a legal agreement that you sign at the end of the licensing process. The licensing process is a series of steps you go through to take your intellectual property and move it toward finding a partner who will then what's called commercialize it, or take your IP, whether it's entertainment or medical devices or whatever the case may be, and make and sell products based on it, or technology based on it. And at the end of that licensing, or 3/4 of the way through, I should say, you sign the license agreement that tells everybody what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. Then everybody works toward, making some money with it and following the guidelines and rules of the license agreement. So that's really the short story of how I got into it. And, along the way since then, I've been working with a lot of different companies, medical devices, consumer products, entertainment, technologies, content, training courses, formulas. It really goes across the board. And, I work with clients in a couple of ways. One, they bring me on to manage the entire licensing process for them, from strategy and planning all the way through to finding a partner, negotiating a deal, and managing that deal, to consulting them on specific aspects, whether it's negotiating a deal, trying to help them get out from something that's not working right, things like that. And, along the way, as I said, learning that people didn't really have an understanding of it, I also encountered a lot of inventors and people with startups who were asking a lot of questions. They weren't ready to bring me on in a full-time capacity, if you will, but they wanted information. They wanted to understand what this licensing is about, and that's when I started a educational side of my business, or if you will, called Licensing for Profits. It's licensingforprofits.com online, because what I was quickly figuring out is people were hungry for information, but there was no training out there. Nobody's teaching anybody, except on the legal side, about registering patents, trademarks. It's called prosecuting patents, and then of course the litigation side, which you read about in the news. But there's not any training or education about what is this licensing process? How do you manage an intellectual property? What is it? Because it's known as an intangible asset. And it's similar to real estate. Real estate is what's called real property. Intellectual property is called intangible property. And it's interesting, if you compared them side by side, you'd find a lot of similarities in terms of their characteristics, and also in the progress, if you will, of monetizing or making money. For example, in renting, you have a piece of property, you develop it, put a house on it, a condo, and then you hire agents or brokers who go out, find people who will rent it, manage those, and then it builds value, and you can, get a loan on it or sell it or whatever the case is. Intellectual property and licensing works the same way. You have a raw idea that you create, and you maybe get it patented, form a trademark, copyright, or maybe even a trade secret, and then you build upon it by doing things with it, like prototypes or samples, or starting to sell it, get into the market, and it builds value. And then if you want to take it into the market and make more money with it, you might find somebody such as myself, who's a consultant or an agent, to help you do that and manage that process for you. And then what happens is, just like in real estate, you have renters or people that lease your commercial property. In licensing, you have the same thing. They're called licensees, and they rent or lease your intellectual property. You give them the rights to go and use it and do things with it. And then, of course, on the real estate side, if somebody doesn't pay you or trashes your place or something, you have things that you can do legally to correct that. And the same thing holds true with intellectual property. If your partner isn't performing or does something wrong with your intellectual property, you have things you can do in the contract to correct that, including, evicting them, so to speak. But so that's a kind of a transition from how I got into the business and explaining a bit about licensing, but that's in essence what it is. And there's a lot of moving pieces to it. And, Bill's been gracious enough to invite me in and speak at UCI. And that's important, because oftentimes I find many people start businesses or get business education, I mean, I got an MBA, and this whole discussion of intellectual property and licensing was not a part of it. So it's huge, though. I mean, everything we're doing today, in fact, right now, talking, the shirts you're wearing, the microphones you're speaking into, the glasses you're wearing, the paint you're using, everything is built on intellectual property. Somebody thought that up, created it. It may be licensed, it may not, but it's all built on intellectual property.
Yeah, so Rand, I'm going to ask this question probably 2 or 3 times during this this great interview. And, for all of our listeners out there, how does somebody get in touch with you? What are your coordinates?
Good question. Okay, so you've got my website, licensingconsultinggroup.com, licensingconsultinggroup.com, or licensing4profits.com. Those are both my websites. And you can also reach me at rand@licensingcg.com. That's licensing, C as in consulting, G as in group.com. So you can go to my websites. All my contact information is there. Feel free. You can reach out, send me an email. If you have a question or you'd like to just spend a few minutes on a short call to find out about your licensing option, you can go to my website. I have a scheduler there. Happy to jump on a call and give you some input on what you've got and where you might go with it.
Great. For those that are just tuning in, we are here with Rand Brenner, CEO, Licensing Consulting Group, and licensing4profit.com. And Bill, you were about to. I cut you off. Go right ahead.
No, just when one of the great things that Rand did when he was in the class, he was able to share a really cool story with a gentleman called Mr. Bill Gates on how how Bill made his money, and maybe you want to share that, Rand. That would be kind of cool.
Sure. And I think what Bill's referring to is one of the things that I've really seen and I've really learned out there is intellectual property and licensing is something that isn't fairly new in the last 40 or 50 years. It dates back hundreds of years. And licensing intellectual property is actually in the Constitution of the United States. In fact, Alexander Hamilton was the head of the patent office, and a couple of early presidents were in fact inventors. And the reason that it was put in the Constitution of the United States is because the founding fathers recognized the value and importance of innovation in order to be able to build a nation. And that's been borne out over decades and decades of years, that the most successful economies are those that have had the most mature intellectual property laws. And you've seen that change in the last 50 years around the world with countries that had not been as prosperous or advanced economically with the United States because they didn't have that kind of infrastructure. But intellectual property goes back even further than that, hundreds of years back. One of the terms that's used in licensing, it's called royalties. Well, royalties was actually used hundreds of years ago when the king and some of the monarchs in England and in France and things like that, what would happen is they would grant monopolies to people that maybe spun the yarn or made the apparel or whatever it is back then. And so in return for granting them this monopoly, they had to pay something to the royalty. They had to pay to the king what was called a royalty in order to be able to keep this monopoly of being the official yarn provider or metal provider, or whatever it is. And through the years, you can see it evolve through European law, English law, and then into the American law is the idea of intellectual property. And then along the way, licensing evolved around it as intellectual property laws developed as a way of working with something like intellectual property and being able to give people an incentive to want to invent. That's the purpose behind protecting, having intellectual property laws. You want to give people an incentive. And so patents are designed to help to give people the incentive, saying, look, the trade-off is if you get a patent, you're willing to disclose everything about your patent, but in return, you're going to have this patent for 20 years. It's going to give you exclusivity over it. And then in trademarks, of course, if you have a brand, you want to register it, you want people to know that it's yours. And then copyrights, they develop the copyright system so that authors could protect their works here and around the world. And this was all designed to encourage innovation, because innovation is what propels the economies around the world. And so the better the intellectual property laws, the more effective they are, the better they're managed and updated, the more it encourages people. And of course, it's challenging because technologies change and the types of IP. So you see, especially in the last few years, you've got, crypto, blockchain technologies coming through, you've got artificial intelligence. And so all of these technologies are evolving very quickly. And what happens is that the intellectual property laws have to be updated and changed and adjusted to account for this, because it gets very complex. And of course, you're spending your money and your investment. You want to make sure that you can get your protection. So what Bill was alluding to on the story, that was kind of a long way getting to the story, is what people should also realize, and I share this, is that some of the most successful companies today were founded on intellectual property. And the story that Bill's talking about is the one that I present in the presentations, is the development of Microsoft. And Microsoft started based on a licensing deal that Bill Gates did with IBM. And when he had his first software, the deal that he cut with them, because they had a new computer, but it didn't have a good operating system, they had developed DOS. He said, look, you stick DOS in your computers and you sell it, every one of the computers. But he did something with his license agreement that enabled him to build the world's largest software company. And that was inside the licensing agreement. He carved out rights to sell software upgrades under the Windows brand. And so what happened is, when Microsoft installed millions and millions of copies of DOS in their computers, and they paid for the installation, they shipped the computers out, they did all the advertising and marketing. And so every time somebody turned on one of those old IBM machines, up popped the DOS. And it came with a license agreement, naturally. And so what happened is that spread DOS to millions and millions of users. Then when they had to upgrade, they came back to Microsoft. And the rest is history. It continued on for a while until Microsoft and IBM eventually went their ways. But that is an example of somebody, an entrepreneur, who used licensing to build their business. And there's many others like that. Google is the result, in fact, of the algorithm technology is a license deal between Stanford and the founders of Google. They worked on it at the university. Stanford got a considerable amount of Google stock, made a lot of money. Gatorade, some of the early web browsers, many of the companies today were founded using licensing as a way for them to get their company up and running by partnering with somebody that either had the expertise, the management, distribution, sales, whatever the case is, to help propel it. But, one of the challenges that along the way, because there's not really any education about it, oftentimes people think the only way to get a business off the ground is to do it yourself. And these examples I just shared that's not the case. There's a way of using your intellectual property to work with others, partners. So there's other examples too. And then of course, when I worked at the studios, that's a prime example. When you see these movies and TV shows and they've got t-shirts, hats, shorts, and all of that, you're talking about tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars being generated from products off that IP. And one of the things movie studios, have done and continue to do is use that licensing muscle, that partnership muscle, to be able to combine resources and get even a bigger bang for their promotional buck to get the word out.
Well, we're going to take a break here, just a very short break. We are here with Rand Brenner, CEO of Licensing Consulting Group, and we are talking about intellectual property. And it's just mind-boggling how often this comes up in conversations now that we're living in a digital world. And, I can't even imagine the complexity of what it is you're seeing. And you just mentioned some of it can actually be simplified. You have processes for breaking this down into bite-sized pieces for those that are building businesses, expanding, and otherwise are trying to protect what they have. So we'll be right back after this break, and we're going to peel the onion. We're going to talk about what can be specifically addressed in this whole world of intellectual property, and what cannot. But we will be right back after this short break. Thank you.
Take KMET 1490 AM with you everywhere you go by downloading our free smartphone apps found on the KMET website, KMET1490AM.com. You can also go to the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store on your phone to download the free app. Now you can listen live or play any of your favorite programmers' podcasts using your smartphone. Go to KMET1490AM.com and download your free phone app today.
Jim Carvin, T&G Real Estate, California DRE license 014-37693. Are you an accredited investor needing a 1031 exchange? Or maybe you're tired of being a landlord and just want to cash out and still get the tax break? Find out about solid 1031 eligible passive real estate investments with worry-free monthly payouts. Visit 1031answers.com. That's 1031answers.com.
Drinking fresh juice is a delicious way to keep yourself and your family healthy. And when it comes to fresh juice, Pericone Farms is the best in the game. For 17 years, Pericone Farms has been providing fresh juice to the finest resorts and restaurants throughout Southern California. Now, that same fresh quality is available in the produce department of your local Bristol Farms, Albertsons, Ralph's, and other fine retailers. Stay healthy. Stay fresh. Drink real juice from Pericone Farms.
You're listening to KMET 1490 AM News, Talk, Sports. And now, back to our program.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining the West Coast Business Review. We are here with Rand Brenner, CEO, Licensing Consulting Group, and we are talking about this light subject of intellectual property. And we've all heard the term, but what is it really? You know, and I'm finding out right now how little I actually knew versus what it is I would have speculated. And this has been fun. What do you say, Bill? Are we? Do you see my IQ points rising? The more Mr. Brenner talks, it's exactly it's expanding. And with in all seriousness, with these businesses out there trying to protect their patents and trademarks and copyrights and trade secrets, and trying to do their due diligence on this intellectual property and not getting hit in blind spots. Bill Morrison, I can't thank you enough for coming on, Rand. And right before we went to break, we promised the listeners that when we came back, we were going to talk about what can and cannot qualify for licensing. And I think when you made that comparison to real estate, I think that really was magnificent, because you can appraise things and you need to take care of things and you need to have the accounting correct and the legal correct, and you have to have the whatever specialist. You got the termite, the plumber, the electrical, and but who do you go to really have the Rolodex and the ability to take complex things and make them very organized and prioritized and make people feel comfortable. Hey, you can get through this process. Some of these things are not as big as you think, and then there's other things that you need to take very seriously. So, with that, why don't you give us? I'll let you launch with what can be licensed,
Sure.
and then if there's some things that you see that cannot, that you get approached with, that would be interesting as well.
Sure. And it's a great point. And we talked about a few types, and I'll start with the types of intellectual property. And most people are familiar with patents, trademarks, copyrights. And most of those are the most common form, and they get licensed. For example, when I was at the movie studios, those were predominantly copyrights on the characters, maybe the branded, name of the cartoon, the Looney Tunes or Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. So we would be out there making, licensing plush dolls or T-shirts or stopping somebody from jumping out of an airplane in a costume. I mean, all sorts of crazy things were going on. But the point being is that those type of intellectual properties, trademarks, copyrights, patents, most well known. Now, there's a lot that goes on inside of those. There's a lot, and I'll start with patents, because I think that's a big category, and a lot of people approach me with patents. Now, it's important to understand that getting a patent doesn't necessarily mean that you can license it, okay? There's a lot of patents that can't be licensed, and there's a lot of reasons why you should get a patent and why you shouldn't get a patent. The most important thing to understand about a patent is you have to figure out if you can even sell it and make money with it. I'm approached with a lot of times with inventors who create a patent. For example, one gentleman approached me and had created this just terrific new photography umbrella that people would use in the background to reflect light. And he put in a lot of money to it, put in titanium rods that came out this way and that way. I mean, just super duper. And it was very impressive. And he had brought me on board to help him license it. So one of the things that I do as my services is, as you'd mentioned, Daryl, one of the things that you want to do in licensing is it's important to understand it's not necessarily about the technology, because it can be very complex. It's about what does it deliver from the standpoint of profits or cost savings or liability reduction or whatever. But also, can it be made? So I share this story about this photography umbrella. So I worked with this client. It was great. I went through the process of finding target companies, reaching out to them. So we got a hold of a couple of companies, one in particular, fairly large one. They really liked it. So we sent a sample to them. The sample arrived. And the other thing I mentioned to people, and this especially as it relates to patents, about the manufacturability of it. So this arrived, and we had a phone call with the head of product development and the head of manufacturing, because one of the first things that will happen, especially if you have something that has to be made, has to be produced, is somebody from manufacturing is going to get involved in it. And they loved it, but here was the problem. They looked at it, we had a conversation, they said, this thing is terrific, but here's the problem. We can't make this thing. It's too expensive. It's just constructed in such a way and using materials in such a way that there's no practical way we could make it. It would just be too expensive of an item. And so unfortunately, they backed away from that and sent it back. And obviously it's disappointing, but that's not an uncommon occurrence. That happens quite a bit with people who create these things. See, you have to remember, especially with patents, you're not creating it for you. You're creating it for the market. And if the market can't produce it, I mean, companies that you take it to, then it's going to be very difficult. Even if you decide you're going to make it, you still have to figure out how to get everything together. So that's one example of what you should do and what can't be licensed from a patent standpoint. The other thing is provisional patents. And many people may have heard the term. A provisional is where you file basically a statement, a document with the patent office that just holds your place in line, says, I've got this idea, I've got this invention, but I'm not ready to file a full patent. So they give you 1 year to hold your place in line. And you can go out and you can say it's a provisional patent. But here's the problem with a provisional patent. There's no guarantee that you're going to get a patent. So when you go out to try to license a provisional patent, the odds are very, very low that you'll find anybody interested, because it's still an unknown. So that will be very challenging to license.
And
Okay.
what about a utility patent? We hear a lot of utility patents on Shark Tank.
Well, sure. And there's two main types of patents. There's utility and design patent. Now, the utility is the big one. This is the one that everybody tries to get, because this is the one that is the most robust, has the claims, and is usually around technologies and products, and it's utilitarian. I mean, the use of it, the operation of it, whatever the case is. And that's a big one, and that's sometimes considered, most cases, sometimes considered the more, if you will, valuable patent. Okay, the other type of patent is a design patent. You can get design patents for designs around clothing and products and things like that. But there's other ways that you could protect designs, not only through the patent system, but both of those are examples of patents. Now, is one more licensable than the other? It would depend on the patent and the product and the prototype and what you do with it. I mean, at the end of the day, it all comes down to what you do with it. I think the important thing for people to understand is just because you have a patent doesn't mean you can license it, okay? A patent by its very nature, when it's issued, doesn't necessarily have any value, because if you haven't put anything behind it, if you haven't done anything, you haven't made a prototype, you haven't sampled it, then there's nothing that you can you have too many unknowns. Now, without getting into a complex subject here, there are reasons that companies, and these are very sophisticated strategies, they're called patent strategies, get patents that they don't plan to commercialize. But that's for competitive reasons, litigation reasons, things that would take too long to talk about here. But I think for most people, it's important to understand that if you're interested in licensing a patent, even commercializing it successfully, you have to first make sure you can make it. Now, let's talk about copyrights. Copyrights apply to things like movies, TV shows. You're watching a copyright right now, this copyrighted show. So what makes them popular? And what makes them licensable? Well, if you sell a big book, like everybody's familiar with Harry Potter, that book series became very big, or Twilight, or any number of these huge book series become very popular. So with copyrights, it's about, having some visibility. Now, there's many, many people who write books, and just because you publish a book doesn't mean you could do anything from a licensing standpoint. Although when you do find a publisher who publishes your book, that is a license in itself. What I'm referring to is some of these books that become movies and TV shows and things like that. Or if you produce a movie or a video game or things like that, that's all copyrighted, okay? But again, here, just because you've created something and copyrighted, okay, doesn't mean you can license it. You have to do something with it, okay? And with copyrights, there's a lot of things you can do. I mean, at the movie studios, I go back to that, it's a perfect example. With a big popular movie, you had t-shirts, hats, shorts, foods, special events, theme park rides, you name it. There's a lot of places to go with that content into video games, for example. And so that's the versatility. Copyrights are very versatile because there's many things. You can duplicate it. You can let people use it. You can let people improve it. There's a lot of things you can do with it, but you have to have something behind it. So, and the important thing to understand is that when you license, you have to be very specific. Well, copyrights are tricky. One of the things is that you have so many rights that are available. You have to make sure that you give them only the rights they're supposed to have and restrict the rights that they're not supposed to have, okay? And the other thing to understand is copyright's created when you create it. But again, it doesn't mean that it's licensable. So you have to take that into account. And then finally, a trademark. Most people are familiar with brands and logos, trademarks. Again, the more popular they are, the better they can be licensed. And there's a big licensing industry built around partnering with brands and trademarks for sports and apparel and things like that. And a lot of places you can go. I've worked with national sports leagues, collegiate sports leagues, the Olympics, soccer leagues, things like that have always been popular. Also car brands, food brands, all sorts of things like that. And even within that, by the way, people don't realize that there's a lot of things that you can do to make your brand different. Like, for example, in one of the things that I share on my blog articles, I always like to find a little bit of a case study. There's a gal who had a brand for yoga and basically came up with an interesting niche of farm yoga, or discovered that, hey, if you come out to a farm, it's a stress-reducing type of thing. So why not come to a farm, enjoy yoga, reduce stress, get out in the country? So she created a whole brand thing around farm yoga, farm products, farm nutrients, farm tea, the whole bit, and embarked upon a licensing program that took her yoga brand into kind of a lifestyle, a stress reduction lifestyle. So that's, again, just one small thing that you can do with it. And then there's an area of intellectual property called trade secrets. Now, this is confidential information, but probably the best example is Google's algorithm. You don't know what that is to make it go. Kentucky Fried Chicken has 7 spices. Coca-Cola has a formula. Mrs. Fields has a recipe. Okay, these are all trade secrets. They don't publish them anywhere. They keep them secret. That's what makes them valuable. And then they use licensing, and then they build these big licensing programs around it. And the same thing, you can see that with Apple and technology and everything like that. So all of these types of companies who have trade secrets, that's their secret sauce. Think of a trade secret as a secret sauce. It could be your knowledge, could be what you do, but it's that secret sauce. And then there's a whole bunch of things you can do with applying a copyright on top of that, a trademark, a brand, whatever the case is. So there are all licensing opportunities in there. And as I said, not every not every IP, not every patent, not every trademark copyright can be licensed. Okay, it's important to understand that. So,
yep. I remember
for those,
time you brought the telephone, the old Apple phone, and,
sure.
and that was just, my class was like, oh my God, I never realized that. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For those that just tuned in, we are here with Rand Brenner, CEO, Licensing Consulting Group. Also has another entity which is focused on educational components of this, which is Licensing for Profit. Licensing, then the number 4 profit.com. And Bill's going to get mad at me. I got to do 2 things, Rand, or I'm going to be in trouble with Bill Morris. First thing is, I want you to shout out your coordinates so that those listening now, later, can get you. So I'm going to have you do that, email address, website, so they can contact you. And then the second, as we get to the end of this interview, I want to make sure you got plenty of time to answer the question, what services do you offer, and what clients, because I'm sure we all within our industries, it's like, oh wow, I wish I could have got to this person a little sooner, or they got to me just at the right time, because we don't know each other's industries, whether it's your own doctor or your attorney, and you're the quarterback when it comes to intellectual property. You have the whole 360 view of when is the legal to come in, when does the accounting come in, all of these components. So I don't get in trouble with Bill Morris. Go ahead and shout out your coordinates, and then we're going to move right into your services and how you see yourself, what clients can really benefit from getting a hold of you, and when should they, and how can you help them?
Sure. Okay. First, my website is licensingconsultinggroup.com. You can go there. I've got newsletters, videos, all sorts of resources, lots of articles that you can view. That's licensingconsultinggroup.com. And then on the education side, this is the nuts and bolts, the how-to. So if you're interested in getting some education on it, whether it's, have I protected my property correctly? How do I form a presentation? What is a negotiation about? Every step in the process, you can get educated. It's called Licensing for the number 4 Profits, either singular or plural, profits.com. And again, there I offer newsletters, free workshops, ebooks, courses, anything that you would be interested in learning about the process of licensing, you can find there. And I'm always updating that with new courses and presentations and offers on some training programs. And when you visit those sites too, I have a link. If you'd like to have a short chat, you have a question about your intellectual property, you're wondering if it is licensable, just go there, click on schedule a meeting. We can set up a short call, 15 or 20 minutes, and I'd be happy to have a direct conversation with you. You can also reach me by email at Rand, R-A-N-D, at licensingcg.com. Rand at licensing, C is in consulting, G is in group.com, or Rand at licensingforprofits.com. Either of those emails will come right to me. And you'll also find my contact information on those websites. So I told you a bit about licensing for profits on the education side. On the consulting side, my services focus predominantly in 2 areas. One is managing the licensing process for a client. So, for example, I may work with a medical device company, a consumer product company, and they are interested in having me manage their licensing campaign, their outbound campaign, everything from strategy and planning, researching licensees, developing licensing materials, finding the contacts in the companies, setting up and scheduling the outbound licensing communication, doing the follow-up, organizing calls, all the things along the licensing process into the negotiation, getting the license agreements negotiated and signed off, and then managing what's called the onboarding or asset transfer, knowledge transfer, and then monitoring and compliance. Because after you sign an agreement, you're in a relationship and you still have to make sure that everybody is doing what they're supposed to be doing inside that agreement. So, and I offer this service outbound, that's called outbound licensing. And then on occasion, I have clients who will come to me and say, hey, Rand, can you help us get a TV show? Can you help us get a movie? And they'll hire me to go out and figure out what movies and TV shows, for example, are available. And then I will work the process in reverse, if you will, reach out, find out what's available, send the information, qualify, negotiate the deals, and help bring that property in, if that's the case. And then I also offer my services hourly. For example, I'm working with several different clients on an hourly basis in a very specific area. One client has approached me. They have a technology. They were approached by a large company who has proposed a licensing deal with them, but they don't know anything about licensing. So they brought me on board. And what I'm doing is I'm working with them through the deal process, reviewing the information they're getting, helping them work through setting the terms, and then go back and negotiate the deal and bring it back to me, look at the deal terms, figure out what they should be offering going back. So I'm operating and behind the scenes advising them on what they need to think about and put into the deal. And so sometimes I do that. Other times companies will come to me and say, look, I've been reaching out to licensing partners. I haven't been successful. What's not working here? So they ask me to work with them to get their information figured out. Sometimes I'll have a company come to me, perhaps it's a seminar coaching company that says, hey, how can I convert my coaching services into a licensable IP? So I will work with them on the strategy side of that. How do we make that? How do we bundle that up and create a licensable IP? And other aspects of licensing, and people do approach me when they get in trouble. And that's not really the right time to approach me. When they come to me and they say, I've got a bad licensing partner, I'm in the middle of litigation, what can I do? And unfortunately, I operate as a consultant and agent. I can work with you, on everything except the litigation. When it comes to legal issues, I'm not an attorney. I would refer you to speak with a proper legal counsel, whether it's litigation or contractual attorney or whatever it is. So ideally, you would come to me before you get in trouble. And I'd say for most people, businesses, startups, you have intellectual property. At the very least, you owe it to yourself to give some thought to that more than just saying, oh, I'm going to stick it on the shelf and that's what we're going to build our product on. Because that's not the case. You may be missing some great opportunities that you could be using in the market through licensing. Because it's important to understand licensing isn't either or. It's not either I'll license or I'll go direct. That's not the case. You can do both. You can start on licensing, then go direct. You can go direct and then go licensing in any number. It's a very fluid strategy, and I encourage anybody and everybody who's got a business, you owe it to yourself to at least evaluate it and understand it, because oftentimes you'd be surprised. You can discover you can do a lot more with your IP than just make or deliver your product or service.
Yeah, we've had Bill Morris and myself have had several people on where they endeavored down a certain path, only to find out that the real value was someplace totally different. Over the years we've heard about, you've had some sports franchises that were earning 1x per year, and next thing you know, they start licensing and producing goods and services. Next thing you know, that's 10x. That's dwarfing the original endeavor, and in order to do that, individuals like yourself need to be at the beginning, middle, and end of these.
And you raise a really good point too, Daryl, an important point I think people have to understand. You have revenue income. That's where you make and sell something. And you have recurring revenue, okay? And the difference is when you make and sell something, you have to go through the effort of selling each product or distributing, whatever it is. Recurring revenue, when you sell a license, just like you said with the sports franchise, excellent. When you place those licenses, whether 1, 2, 3, or 4 of these licenses, you only have to sell them once. And these partners are paying you over and over again. That's where you get to the 10x, because suddenly when you have recurring revenue, you don't have to spend the money to generate that revenue anymore. So your profit is going like this, as opposed to struggling with your. Well, I mean, you know what happens. You start selling something and then sales slow down. You spend more money in advertising, so your profit margins shrink. Whereas under licensing, the more that your licensees do, the greater your profitability is, because they're paying you a royalty, which goes to your bottom line. I mean, once you set your license in place, It's just the cost to either retain somebody like me or have somebody internally to manage and monitor it and make sure everybody's doing what they say they're doing. And that makes it that much more profitable than having the expense of, producing, selling, returns, and everything else.
What were you going to say, Bill?
So
No, I was just going to say, just like Bill Gates, he just sat back.
Yeah, it's a perfect example. And I think, the other point too is I would say is hearing this conversation, and Bill, you and I have talked about this in the class, and especially talking to the students afterwards, once they get their eyes open, and I find this a lot, just understanding the world a little bit, just a little bit of intellectual property and licensing, if I've just opened your eyes a little bit, is to realize that intellectual property is not a static thing. It doesn't sit on a shelf. Your intellectual property can move around the world. There's no borders to it, because as the laws matured, whether it's a patent in the United States, it's still a patent in Europe or Asia or South America or Africa. Okay, that's one. Two, the intellectual property laws are similar around the world. They're not identical, but the licensing process is. So unlike having to make and sell something and be limited by your geographical location, your intellectual property isn't limited. So for example, I've worked with clients who have their product being produced in the United States, but they say, hey, we've got an opportunity in Europe. Well, great. Instead of going over there, why don't you just let your intellectual property go over there and find a partner? I worked with one company that had that very situation come up. They'd invented a bungee cord, an approved bungee cord, but what had happened is they got approached by a European company. It started off as a distribution deal, said, we really like your technology. They started doing it. They said, this is great. We'd like rights for Europe. And this was a small startup, so they weren't going to be able to get to Europe anytime soon. So that was a great opportunity. That was essentially found revenue for them and enabled them to move their product into that marketplace. And this occurs, over and over again. And that's the opportunities that you can get through licensing.
Well, I need your help on licensing, because what I want to do is I want to license the before and after picture of Bill Morris versus myself. Okay, so I'm the before, you do 20,100 sit-ups consecutive, and then Bill will be the after deal. So you have to share with us. But we are here with Rand Brenner, CEO, Licensing Consulting Group. You have made a very, very compelling argument for getting this understood quickly, because people oftentimes work hard, but they're not working smart, and that can be very catastrophic financially. As you said, there's you're having multiple income streams and so forth. But we're going to have you, with your permission, we're going to have you back on. You're going to be what we call a repeat offender, okay? Because this is big, and I think we're just touching the top. Yeah, this gets very big. And
we've got about 30 seconds left. Maybe Rand could one more time give his coordinates.
Let's do it.
Sure.
We're going to go out.
Licensingconsultinggroup.com and licensingforprofits.com. Go there. You can get all my contact information, www.licensingconsultinggroup.com and www.licensing4profits.com.
Very good. Well, we are out of time. Thank you for joining the West Coast Business Review with Bill Morris and myself, Daryl McCants. Today with Rand Brenner, CEO of Licensing Consulting Group. Thank you, Rand, and we're going to have you back.
Thank you.
Good.
Great. Thank you, Bill. Great
Good
seeing
you,
you.
buddy.
Thanks.
You've been listening to West Coast Business Review with Daryl McCants, heard every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Pacific Time. And don't forget to check out the show's programmer podcast on the KMET website.